Chapter 1. The Wounded Defiance. "You're pathetic." The words hit like claws across exposed flesh. Kira felt them sink deep into the wounds that already carved her ribs raw, heard them echo in the hollow spaces where her wolf's pride used to live. The pack healer's hands moved over her torn shoulder with clinical indifference, needle threading through skin that refused to heal properly, and she bit down on the leather strap between her teeth to keep from whimpering. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, being treated as less than, but the fresh shame of yesterday's failure burned hotter than the antiseptic the healer poured across her back. "Hold still!" Elder Marin snapped, her weathered fingers showing no gentleness as she worked. "Though I don't know why we're wasting supplies on you. Your wolf can barely shift without collapsing." The words were meant to cut, and they did. Kira's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, wounded but not broken, never broken. The beast that lived in her chest had taken a beating in the territorial skirmish, had been overwhelmed by 3 enemy wolves while trying to protect the pack's eastern border, but her spirit burned as fierce as ever. Fiercer, maybe. Because being defeated was one thing, being dismissed as worthless was another entirely. "She fought," Kira said quietly, her voice hoarse from screaming during the battle. "My wolf fought." "And lost." The response came from the doorway, dripping with disdain. Lydia stepped into the healing den like she owned it, like she owned everything, her perfect golden wolf radiating health and strength even in human form. "Spectacularly, you let 3 rogues through our border because you couldn't handle a simple patrol." Kira's wolf bared its teeth inside her chest, a snarl that wanted to rip free from her throat. The sudden surge of protective fury made her wounds throb, made her gasp against the pain, but she couldn't stop the response, wouldn't stop it. Even injured, even broken, her wolf would not bow to Lydia's cruelty. "Easy," Elder Marin muttered, pressing harder on the gash across Kira's shoulder blade. "Your wolf's getting agitated. You'll tear the stitches." But Kira couldn't control the defensive rage that rose when Lydia approached. Her wolf had always been different, had always reacted to threats with more violence than sense, and being wounded only made the protective instincts stronger, more desperate. "Look at her," Lydia said, circling the healing table like a predator studying wounded prey. "Even now she's trying to bare her teeth at me. That defective wolf of yours doesn't know when to submit." The word defective hit like a physical blow. Kira had heard it whispered behind her back for years, had felt it in every dismissive glance and cruel laugh, but hearing it spoken aloud in the sacred space of the healing den felt like a violation. Her wolf snarled soundlessly, hackles raised despite the pain, despite the impossibility of winning any confrontation in her current state. "She's not defective," Kira whispered, the words scraping raw from her throat. "She's just different. Different." Lydia laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Is that what you call it when your wolf collapses after 10 minutes of combat? When you can't even maintain your shift long enough to properly patrol our borders?" Elder Marin's hand stilled for a moment, and Kira caught the flicker of something almost like sympathy in the old woman's eyes, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "The injuries are severe," the healer said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "The muscle damage to her left hindquarter. Her wolf may never run at full strength again. And the head trauma." She paused, meeting Kira's gaze with something that might have been regret. "There could be complications, permanent complications." The words settled over the den like a death sentence. Kira felt her wolf retreat deeper into her chest, wounded pride curling around the physical pain like a protective shell. But even broken, even facing the possibility of permanent disability, the fierce creature inside her refused to lower her metaphorical head in submission. "Are unsuitable for breeding," Lydia said with satisfied cruelty. "Unsuitable for protection duties, unsuitable for anything that matters to the pack." She leaned closer to where Kira lay face down on the healing table, her voice dropping to a whisper meant to cut deep. "Maybe now you'll finally accept what everyone already knows. You don't belong here." Kira's wolf exploded with soundless fury, every instinct screaming to shift and fight, consequences be damned. The surge of desperate energy made her body convulse against the restraints, made her cry out as fresh blood seeped through the bandages, made Elder Marin curse and reach for stronger sedatives. But even as the drugs pulled her toward unconsciousness, even as her vision blurred and her struggles weakened, Kira's wolf bared its teeth one more time at the golden she-wolf who represented everything the pack valued and everything Kira would never be. Defiant, unbroken, different. "Sedate her completely," Lydia instructed, as if she had the authority to make medical decisions. "That wolf is dangerous. Even injured, it doesn't know its place." The last thing Kira heard before the darkness claimed her was Elder Marin's quiet response, spoken so softly it might have been meant for no one at all. Maybe that's not the wolf that needs to learn its place. And somewhere in the growing darkness of drug-induced sleep, Kira's injured wolf lifted its head and whined softly, not in submission, but in recognition, as if somewhere beyond the healing den, beyond the pack that had never valued her properly, something waited that would finally understand what she truly was. Something was coming. Something that would see her wolf's fierce spirit and recognize it not as defective, but as exactly what it was meant to be. But for now, she slept, and her wolf dreamed of silver moonlight and golden eyes that held no judgment, only recognition. Chapter 10. The Power Awakening. The sacred moonstone circle blazed with silver fire as Princess Luna knelt at its centre, her body convulsing with the agony of complete transformation. Every barrier that had contained her royal power for 18 years was shattering at once, unleashing forces that made the very stones beneath her feet crack with resonant energy. "Hold on!" Alpha King Darius commanded from the circle's edge, his golden eyes blazing with shared pain as the mate bond transmitted every wave of her torment directly into his consciousness. Let it happen. Let the suppression break completely. Kira screamed as her bones restructured themselves, as her wolf expanded beyond anything natural into something mythical. Silver fur erupted along her spine, each strand catching moonlight like woven starfire. Her eyes blazed with power that had been sleeping for generations, royal authority finally claiming its rightful place. The pain was transcendent, excruciating, sublime. Years of magical containment being violently released all at once, like a dam bursting and flooding the world with waters too long contained. "She's growing too fast," Elder Marin whispered, from where the pack watched in awed terror. "Her body can't handle that level of power awakening." But Darius stepped into the sacred circle, his own wolf surging to the surface as he placed his hands on Luna's convulsing form. Golden light merged with silver, the mate bond creating a channel for the overwhelming energy to flow between them instead of destroying her from within. "Together," he growled, his voice carrying harmonics of ancient authority. "We do this together." The transformation reached its crescendo in an explosion of light that turned night into day across the entire territory. When the brilliance finally faded, when the sacred stones stopped humming with resonant power, Princess Luna stood revealed in her full royal glory. She was magnificent. Her wolf form towered beside the Alpha King's, silver fur shimmering with supernatural luminescence, her presence radiating the kind of authority that made lesser creatures prostrate themselves without conscious thought. Crown light flickered around her massive head like a diadem made of captured starshine. "Impossible," Alpha Garrett breathed, his face white with shock as he witnessed power that belonged in legends, not in his humble territory. But before anyone could fully process the miraculous awakening, the attack came. Crimson Fang warriors poured through the compound's gates like a tide of darkness, their coordinated assault speaking of careful planning and desperate determination. They had waited for this moment, for the princess to be vulnerable during her transformation, and now they moved to eliminate the threat before her power could fully stabilize. "Kill them both!" The enemy Alpha's voice boomed across the battlefield. "The prophecy dies tonight!" Lydia stood among the attackers, her betrayal complete as she led Crimson Fang forces toward the sacred circle. Her golden beauty was twisted with hatred as she witnessed the mate bond that had destroyed all her political ambitions. "You should have died quietly," she snarled at Luna, silver blade gleaming in her hand. "Should have accepted your place instead of reaching for what was never meant to be yours." Luna's response was a roar that shook the earth, royal fury made manifest as she faced the wolves who had tormented her, suppressed her, tried to murder her for the crime of existing. Her claws extended like silver lightning as she launched herself at the nearest attacker. The battle was glorious and terrible, ancient power unleashed after years of containment. Luna moved with predatory grace that belonged to something beyond mortal wolves, her strength magnified by royal bloodline and mate bond combined. Warriors who had dismissed her as worthless now faced the reality of suppressed power, finally set free. She tore through their ranks like moonlight through shadow, her silver form blazing with supernatural fire as she protected the pack that had never protected her. Because even after everything they had done, they were still innocents caught in the crossfire of forces beyond their understanding. Darius fought beside her, their combined power creating cascades of golden and silver light that turned the battlefield into something from legend. The mate bond synchronized their movements until they fought as a single entity with two bodies, covering each other's attacks with seamless precision. "This is what you feared!" Luna roared as she faced the Crimson Fang Alpha, her voice carrying the authority of royal bloodlines that had ruled for centuries. "This is why you tried so hard to keep me suppressed, because you knew what I would become." The enemy Alpha was massive, scarred from countless battles, his power earned through violence and conquest. But as he faced the awakened Silver Crown Princess, doubt flickered in his eyes for the first time. "You're still just one wolf," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction as Luna's presence pressed against his consciousness like the weight of mountains. "Am I?" Luna smiled, her silver fangs gleaming with predatory promise. "Look around you. Look at what your conspiracy has accomplished." The Crimson Fang forces were in retreat, their carefully planned assault shattered against power they had never imagined possible. Luna had not just awakened, she had transcended, becoming something that existed in the space between mortal wolf and divine force. Lydia made one final desperate attempt, her blade aimed for Luna's heart, while the princess was focused on the enemy Alpha. But Darius intercepted the attack with a roar of protective fury, his claws opening the traitor's throat before she could complete her strike. "You chose the wrong side," he said simply as Lydia collapsed, her golden beauty fading as life left her eyes. The enemy Alpha tried to retreat, but Luna was done with running, done with hiding, done with allowing threats to her people to escape and regroup. "You wanted to see what happens when royal bloodlines unite," she said, her voice carrying the finality of judgment itself. "Here we are." The combined power of the Alpha King and Silver Crown Princess struck the Crimson Fang leader like divine retribution, silver and golden light merging into something that transcended mere physical force. When the brilliance faded, nothing remained but empty armor and the memory of power too great to be contained by mortal flesh. Silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the sound of surviving enemies fleeing into the darkness. The pack that had tormented Luna now knelt before her in genuine submission, their eyes wide with understanding of what she truly was. Princess Luna, heir to the Silver Crown, fated mate of the Alpha King. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the union completed despite every attempt to prevent it. And in the sacred Moonstone Circle where it had all begun, where her power had finally broken free from 18 years of suppression, Luna lifted her massive silver head and howled triumph to the stars. The The broken serving girl was gone forever. The Silver Crown Princess had claimed her throne. Chapter 11. The Royal Recognition. Dawn broke over the sacred grove like a benediction, painting the moonstone circle in shades of gold and silver that seemed to echo the power still radiating from the united royal pair. Princess Luna and Alpha King Darius knelt facing each other at the circle's heart, their combined presence making the ancient stones hum with harmonic resonance. Oracle Thana approached with ceremonial reverence, carrying the silver circlet that had been hidden for 18 years, waiting for this moment of recognition. The crown seemed to pulse with its own light as she held it aloft, acknowledging the bloodline that had finally reclaimed its rightful inheritance. "By the authority of the ancient powers," the oracle intoned, her voice carrying across the assembled witnesses, "I restore to Princess Luna of the Silver Crown bloodline her rightful title, her royal heritage, and her sovereign authority over all territories sworn to the Moon Throne." The circlet settled onto Luna's brow with the weight of destiny fulfilled, starlight caught in silver metal that had been forged by powers older than recorded history. The moment it touched her skin, her wolf howled with recognition so profound it made every creature for miles respond with instinctive submission. Pack members who had tormented her now knelt with genuine reverence, their eyes lowered before power they finally understood. Alpha Garrett stepped forward with the careful dignity of one approaching a force of nature, his scarred face showing the kind of regret that came with terrible understanding. "Your Highness," he said formally, the title falling from his lips with the weight of absolute acknowledgement. We failed to recognize what you were, failed to protect what should have been sacred. We beg your forgiveness." Luna studied the Alpha who had allowed her suffering, her silver eyes blazing with power and judgment. The pack held its collective breath, waiting for royal vengeance that would be entirely justified. "You saw what you were shown," she said finally, her voice carrying the grace of true nobility alongside its supernatural authority. The conspiracy was designed to hide the truth even from those who should have recognized it. I do not hold you responsible for deceptions that were older than your pack's memory. The magnanimous response sent ripples of amazed relief through the crowd, but Luna wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her tone hardening with royal command, "going forward, my people will be protected absolutely. No wolf in any territory under my protection will suffer what I suffered. Is this understood?" "Yes, Your Highness," came the unified response, voices carrying genuine commitment born from witnessing what happened when royal patience was exhausted. Darius rose beside her, his golden eyes blazing with pride and possession as he prepared for the second part of the ceremony, the mate bond completion ritual where their supernatural connection would be formally recognized before all witnesses. "Princess Luna of the Silver Crown," he said, his voice carrying across the grove with the authority of absolute devotion. "I, Alpha King Darius of the Golden Wolf bloodline, claim you as my fated mate before the assembled powers of earth and sky." Luna stood to face him, her silver circlet catching the morning light as she accepted the claiming that would unite two of the most powerful bloodlines in living memory. "I accept your claim, Alpha King Darius," she replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were acknowledging. "And I claim you in return as mate and king, as partner and protector, as the other half of my soul." The moment their hands joined, golden and silver light exploded between them in a display that could be seen for miles. The mate bond, no longer hidden or denied, blazed with the intensity of destiny finally allowed to fulfill itself. But before the ceremony could conclude, before the assembled witnesses could process the earth-shaking implications of this union, enemy horns sounded from the compound's borders. Rival kingdoms, drawn by reports of the awakened Silver Crown Princess, had arrived to challenge the union that threatened to shift the balance of power across all territories. 3 different armies approached under banners of ambition and ancient grudges, each determined to prevent the prophesied alliance from cementing itself. "They're testing us," Darius said grimly, his hand moving to the sword that had conquered a dozen territories, "testing whether our combined power is real or legend." Luna smiled, her expression carrying the kind of predatory confidence that belonged to apex predators who had just discovered their true strength. "Then let's show them." The battle that followed was less a war than a demonstration. Luna and Darius fought as perfectly synchronized units, their mate bond allowing them to anticipate each other's movements with supernatural precision. Where the Alpha King's strength created openings, the Silver Crown Princess exploited them with lethal grace. Where her speed and agility struck like lightning, his power followed like thunder. The First Army, led by a rival Alpha who had coveted both territories for decades, lasted barely an hour against their combined might. The Second, composed of rogues and mercenaries hired by distant enemies, fled after witnessing their leaders torn apart by power that defied mortal understanding. The Third Army, the largest and most dangerous, was led by a coalition of Alphas who feared what the united royal bloodlines represented. They fought with desperate courage, born of knowing that defeat meant the end of their independent power. But courage meant nothing against destiny fulfilled. Luna moved through their ranks like silver death, her royal wolf tearing through enemy formations with the kind of efficiency that belonged in legends. Darius fought beside her with the relentless precision that had made him the most feared Alpha of his generation, their combined presence turning the battlefield into a showcase of what happened when the universe's chosen pair finally stopped hiding. When the last enemy fell, when the final challenger lay broken on ground, soaked with the blood of those who had dared oppose prophetic truth, Luna and Darius stood triumphant in the centre of devastation they had wrought together. The assembled pack, the surviving enemies, the witnesses from neighbouring territories who had come to judge their strength, all knelt before power that transcended mortal authority and entered the realm of the divine. "Behold," Oracle Thana announced, her ancient voice carrying across the silent battlefield, "the union that will reshape the world. The Silver Crown Princess and the Golden Wolf King, fated mates whose combined rule will bring peace through strength that cannot be challenged." In the sacred grove where it had all begun, where Luna had first awakened to her true heritage, the royal pair completed their mate bond ceremony with words that would echo through history. "You are my mate," Darius said, his voice rough with emotion as he looked at the silver-crowned goddess who had emerged from the broken serving girl he'd first protected. "And you are mine," Luna replied, her silver eyes blazing with love and power in equal measure. The bond snapped into final completion with a sound like distant thunder, golden and silver light merging into something that transcended the merely supernatural and approached the divine. Princess Luna, Silver Crown heir, had not only reclaimed her birthright, she had found her king, and together they would rule with the kind of power that made kingdoms tremble and enemies flee before their combined might. Chapter 12. The Silver Queen's Dawn. 6 months had passed since the awakening, and Princess Luna stood on the balcony of her restored Silver Crown Palace, watching the sun rise over territories that now knew peace through strength rather than fear through weakness. The silver circlet had been replaced by a crown of starlight and moonstone, her authority no longer questioned by any who ruled the neighbouring lands. She was no longer the broken wolf who had bared her teeth in desperate defiance against pack cruelty. She was Queen Luna, Silver Crown ruler, and her mere presence commanded the kind of respect that made kingdoms prosper and enemies reconsider their ambitions. "Still thinking about how it all began?" Darius approached from behind, his arms encircling her waist as he pressed a gentle kiss to the mark on her neck where their mate bond pulsed with contented warmth. "Sometimes," Luna admitted, leaning back against his familiar strength. "It seems impossible that the terrified serving girl who whimpered in pain could become this. She didn't become this, Darius corrected gently, his golden eyes reflecting the morning light as he studied her profile. She always was this. She just finally had the chance to stop hiding. Through the palace windows came the sounds of a kingdom at peace, children laughing in the courtyards, merchants calling their wares, the easy conversation of people who no longer feared for their safety. The union of the Silver Crown and Golden Wolf bloodlines had brought stability that extended far beyond their individual territories. The healers confirmed it this morning, Luna said quietly, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach where new life grew beneath her heart. Darius went still behind her, his breath catching with wonder and fierce protective joy. Our heir? The next generation of united bloodlines, Luna confirmed, turning in his arms to meet his blazing gaze. Royal power that won't need to hide, won't need to be suppressed, won't need to fight for recognition. The future she carried would grow up knowing exactly what they were, surrounded by parents who understood the weight of destiny and the strength required to bear it properly. No conspiracy would steal their memories, no enemies would succeed in keeping them from their inheritance. "What would you have told her?" Darius asked, his voice gentle with understanding. "That broken wolf in the healing den who thought she was worthless." Luna considered the question, remembering the pain and desperation that had defined her existence before awakening. The girl who had whined in agony when pack members mocked her perceived weakness, who had bared her teeth in futile defiance against forces too powerful to challenge. "I would have told her that the pack was wrong," she said finally. That being different didn't mean being defective, that her wolf's fierce protectiveness and strange reactions weren't flaws to be ashamed of, but instincts trying to guide her toward truth. She smiled, remembering the moment everything had changed, when her injured wolf had whined softly in recognition instead of fear as the Alpha King approached. That sound had been the beginning of everything, the first crack in the barriers that had contained her true nature. I would have told her that someday someone would see past the lies they'd been told about who she was, Luna continued. Someone whose wolf would recognize hers not as broken or worthless, but as exactly what it was meant to be. "A queen," Darius said simply, his hand joining hers over their growing child. "A queen who learned that true strength isn't about never showing vulnerability," Luna agreed. "It's about choosing when to bare your teeth and when to whine softly, and trusting the right person to understand the difference." The morning sun climbed higher over the Silver Crown Palace, painting the sky in shades of gold and silver that seemed to echo the power that flowed between them. In the distance, pack members who had once tormented her now served with genuine loyalty, earned through her compassionate leadership and unwavering protection of those under her care. Her wolf, no longer grey and broken but silver and luminous with royal authority, stretched contentedly in her chest. No longer did she need to cower or hide or pretend to be less than what she was. No longer did she need to bare her teeth in desperate defiance against a world that refused to see her worth. She was Queen Luna, Silver Crown ruler, fated mate of the most powerful alpha alive, and mother to the next generation of united royal bloodlines. But most importantly, she was the woman who had learned that her worth had never depended on others' recognition. It had always existed, waiting for her to be strong enough to claim it. As Darius pulled her closer, and their mate bond hummed with the contentment of destiny fulfilled, Luna lifted her face to the morning sun and smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who had finally come home to herself. Chapter 2. The Alpha King's Arrival. The compound buzzed with frantic energy that made Kira's injured wolf pace restlessly beneath her bandaged skin. 3 days had passed since the healing den. 3 days of forced bed rest that did nothing to quiet the anticipation crackling through every pack member like lightning before a storm. He was coming. The Alpha King was actually coming. Kira limped through the main courtyard, carrying a basin of wash water. her left leg dragging slightly where the muscle had torn during her failed patrol. The other pack members moved around her like she was invisible, their attention focused entirely on preparations for their legendary visitor, Alpha King Darius. Even his name carried weight that made lesser wolves' heads bow in instinctive submission. "Move faster!" Beta Marcus snarled as he strode past, his arms full of ceremonial banners. "The king arrives within the hour, and if this place isn't perfect—" He let the threat hang unfinished, his eyes promising consequences that would make yesterday's wounds feel gentle. Kira gritted her teeth and forced her injured leg to carry her more quickly across the stones, each step sending sharp protests up her spine. She had been assigned serving duties despite her condition, because even wounded she was considered expendable enough to risk collapse. Better the broken wolf than someone who might actually matter. The great gates stood open in formal welcome, flanked by the pack's strongest warriors in their ceremonial armour. Lydia stood among them like a golden goddess, her hair braided with silver threads and her dress cut to emphasize every perfect curve. She would be presented as the potential alliance mate, the bridge between their pack and the king's legendary territory. Everything had been planned to perfection, everything except what to do with the pack's wounded liability. "Stay out of sight," Alpha Garrett had commanded that morning, his disapproval radiating from every line of his battle-scarred face. "The king doesn't need to see our weaknesses." But even hidden in the servants' quarters, even relegated to the most menial tasks, Kira could feel something building in the air. Her wolf stirred with an energy that had nothing to do with her healing injuries, lifted its head like it was scenting something impossible on the wind. The drums started at sunset, deep, resonant beats that seemed to echo from the earth itself, announcing the approach of royalty. Kira pressed herself against the kitchen window, watching through the glass as the greatest alpha in living memory rode through their gates. And then she saw him. Alpha King Darius sat his black warhorse like he had been carved from the same stone as the mountains, power radiating from him in waves that made every wolf in the compound drop their heads in automatic deference. He was massive even in human form, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of kingdoms, his presence so commanding that the very air seemed to bend around him. But it was his eyes that made Kira's breath catch in her throat. Golden eyes that swept the assembled pack with the calculating gaze of a predator, missing nothing, judging everything. Her injured wolf went completely still, not the stillness of submission or fear, but the frozen alertness of prey that had just realized it was being hunted. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself smaller and more invisible than ever before. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away, because something in those golden eyes was searching, and her wolf responded to that searching with a recognition so profound it made her knees weak. The Alpha King dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the courtyard stones with finality that sounded like a judge's gavel. Pack Alpha Garrett approached with careful respect, bowing precisely low enough to show deference without appearing weak. "Your Majesty," Garrett said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "Welcome to Shadow Moon territory. We are honoured by your presence." Darius inclined his head with the bare minimum of acknowledgement, his attention already shifting to assess the pack's strength, their resources, their potential value as allies. His gaze swept over the warriors, the elders, the carefully arranged display of prosperity and power. And then, impossibly, those golden eyes found the kitchen window where Kira pressed herself against the glass. The world narrowed to that single moment. Everything else faded, the ceremonial welcome, the political negotiations, the careful choreography of alliance-making. There was only the Alpha King's burning gaze and the way her wolf went from stillness to desperate awareness in the space of a heartbeat. He couldn't see her clearly through the glass, couldn't possibly pick out one insignificant servant from the shadows of the kitchen. but his wolf was looking directly at her with an intensity that made her injured body flush with heat, made her wounds throb with something that wasn't entirely pain. "The feast awaits, Your Majesty," Lydia said, stepping forward with practised grace and drawing the king's attention back to the political theatre. "I hope you'll find our hospitality worthy of your standards." Darius turned toward the golden she-wolf with polite interest, but Kira caught the way his jaw tightened, the subtle tension that suggested his wolf was fighting other instincts, fighting the pull towards something it wanted but couldn't logically explain. The procession moved toward the great hall, leaving Kira alone in the kitchen with her racing heartbeat and the impossible memory of golden eyes that had looked at her like she was something worth seeing. "Get those serving platters ready!" Cook barked, startling Kira back to reality. "King or no king, food doesn't serve itself, and mind that limp of yours. Spill anything on His Majesty and they'll use your hide for a doormat." Kira nodded and reached for the heavy silver platters, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged the ceremonial feast. She would have to enter the great hall, would have to serve the Alpha King directly as part of her assigned duties. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her wolf crawling deeper into hiding to avoid the overwhelming presence of the most powerful alpha alive. Instead, her injured wolf lifted its head with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. Something was about to change, something that had been building since the moment those golden eyes found hers through the kitchen window, since her wolf responded to his presence with recognition instead of the fear that should have been natural. Kira balanced the platters against her hip and limped toward the great hall, toward whatever waited in the presence of the Alpha King, whose wolf had looked at her like she was something worth hunting, worth finding, worth claiming. Chapter 3. Unexpected Recognition. The great hall hummed with tension thick enough to taste. Kira limped between the tables, her injured leg screaming with each careful step as she navigated the maze of pack hierarchy made flesh. The highest-ranking wolves sat closest to the raised platform where Alpha King Darius held court, their conversations a careful dance of politics and power. She kept her head down, her wolf pressed small and quiet inside her chest, trying to become invisible among the serving staff. The heavy platters made her wounded shoulder ache, but she gritted her teeth and focused on not spilling anything that would draw unwanted attention. The Alpha King sat in the place of honour beside Alpha Garrett, his presence dominating the room even in apparent relaxation. Every wolf in the hall was acutely aware of him, their postures subtly shifted in his direction like flowers following the sun. Lydia had claimed the seat to his left, playing the perfect potential mate with practised grace. "The southern borders have been testing our defences," Garrett was saying, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "We've lost 3 patrols in the last month to coordinated attacks. Your alliance would ensure our territory remains secure." Kira tried to focus on her duties, tried to ignore the way her wolf kept lifting its head to track the Alpha King's movements. But every time she glanced toward the high table, those golden eyes seemed to find her across the crowded hall, and her chest tightened with something that felt like recognition. "The rogues grow bolder," Darius replied, his voice carrying authority that made even the strongest pack wolves shift in their seats. "They sense weakness and move to exploit it, but strength properly channeled—" He let the implication hang, his gaze sweeping the assembled pack with calculating assessment. Kira approached the high table with a fresh platter of roasted meat, her limp more pronounced under the weight of the serving tray. She could feel eyes on her, pack members noting her graceless movement, her obvious unsuitability for even the most basic tasks. "Clumsy," someone muttered as she passed. "Can't even walk properly." The cruel whisper followed her toward the platform, each step feeling like a walk to execution. Her wolf cowered deeper inside her chest, wounded pride curling around the physical pain like a protective shell. But then Warrior Kane deliberately stepped into her path, his boot catching her injured leg and sending her stumbling forward with a cry of pain. The platter tilted dangerously, heavy metal dishes sliding toward the edge as she fought to keep her balance. "Watch where you're going, cripple," Kane snarled, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Maybe they should put you back in the healing den where broken things belong." Laughter rippled through the nearby pack members, cruel and dismissive. Kira's face burned with humiliation as she struggled to steady the platter, her injured leg threatening to give out entirely under the combined weight of service and mockery. "Can't even serve food without falling apart," another warrior added, his voice dripping with disdain. "Worthless in battle, worthless in service. What exactly is the point of keeping her around?" Her wolf bared its teeth inside her chest, fury rising despite the hopelessness of her position. Even injured, even broken, the fierce creature that lived in her bones refused to accept their dismissal. The defensive rage made her wounds throb, made her hands shake as she fought to maintain her grip on the serving tray. "Maybe she should crawl back to whatever hole spawned her," Kane continued, emboldened by the pack's cruel laughter. "Save us all the embarrassment of watching her try to function like a real wolf." The words hit like physical blows, each insult designed to cut deep and leave scars. Kira's vision blurred with pain and humiliation as pack members surrounded her with their mockery, forming a circle of cruel faces that blocked any escape route. Her wolf snarled soundlessly, hackles raised in desperate defiance, even though they both knew she couldn't fight back. Not here, not injured, not against the entire pack's casual cruelty. And then everything changed. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees as a presence of overwhelming power moved through the crowd like a force of nature. Pack members scattered without thinking, their wolves recognizing apex predator and responding with instinctive submission. Alpha King Darius stepped into the circle of tormentors with the fluid grace of a hunting cat, his golden eyes blazing with something that made even the strongest warriors take involuntary steps backward. The casual authority radiating from him turned the air electric, made every wolf in the vicinity lower their heads in automatic deference. "Is there a problem here?" His voice carried quiet menace that promised consequences for the wrong answer. Kane stammered something about clumsy servants, but his words died under the weight of the Alpha King's stare. Warriors who had been laughing moments before now found the floor intensely interesting, their cruel confidence evaporating in the face of true power. Kira stood frozen in the centre of it all, the serving platter clutched against her chest like armour, her injured wolf going completely still as the most powerful alpha alive stepped closer. She should have been terrified, should have been cowering like every other pack member in proximity to his overwhelming presence. Instead, something impossible happened. Her wolf lifted its head and whined, not the sharp whine of fear or pain, but the soft, submissive sound of recognition, of greeting, of a creature acknowledging something it had been searching for without knowing what it sought. The Alpha King went rigid, his golden eyes widening with shock as his own wolf responded to that quiet sound with a recognition so profound it shattered his careful political composure. The mate bond, dormant and theoretical until this moment, snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. Mine. The word echoed between them, unspoken but unmistakable, carrying the weight of destiny and the terror of impossibility. The great hall fell silent around them, every conversation dying as pack members witnessed their Alpha King staring at the broken serving girl with an intensity that defied explanation. Lydia's face went white with understanding and fury as she realized what she was witnessing. Darius stepped closer, his presence overwhelming but no longer threatening, and Kira's injured wolf whined again, softer this time, pressing toward him through the cage of her ribs with desperate longing. "Your name," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite control. "Kira," she whispered, her own voice barely audible in the silence that had swallowed the hall. "Kira," he repeated, like he was testing the sound of destiny on his tongue. "You're hurt." It wasn't a question. His wolf could scent the pain, could see the way she favoured her left side, could read the evidence of recent battle in every careful movement. And in that moment, with the impossible mate bond humming between them like golden fire, neither of them cared about politics or alliances or the watching pack whose entire future hung in the balance. There was only recognition, only the soft whine of a wounded wolf finally finding what it didn't know it needed, only the beginning of everything. Chapter 4. Forbidden Tending. The private chamber felt smaller with the Alpha King's presence filling every corner, his power radiating like heat from a forge. Kira sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her injured leg stretched out before her, while Darius dismissed the pack healer with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Leave us," he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority that made wolves obey without question. Elder Marin gathered her supplies with obvious reluctance, her worried gaze darting between the Alpha King and the wounded girl who had somehow captured his impossible attention. The door closed behind her with finality that made Kira's heart race. They were alone, the most powerful Alpha alive and the pack's broken outcast, separated by nothing but the mate bond that hummed between them like golden fire. "Let me see," Darius said quietly, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. He moved closer, his overwhelming presence somehow less threatening now that they were away from watching eyes. Kira's wolf whined softly at his approach, pressing toward him through her ribs with desperate longing. The sound made him pause, golden eyes blazing with recognition that shattered his careful composure. "Your wolf," he said roughly. "She knows me." "I don't understand it," Kira whispered, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the bandages around her wounded leg. "She's never responded to anyone like this. She's always been different." Darius knelt beside the bed, his massive frame somehow graceful as he examined her injuries with clinical focus. But when his fingers brushed her skin, checking the torn muscle of her thigh, both their wolves responded with recognition so profound it made the air electric. The moment his touch made contact with her wounds, warmth flooded through her injured flesh. Not the burning heat of infection, but something deeper, more fundamental. Her wolf stretched toward that warmth, like a flower seeking sunlight, and for the first time in days the constant ache began to recede. Impossible," Darius breathed, his golden eyes wide with shock as he watched torn muscle begin to knit together under his hands. "Accelerated healing only occurs between—" He stopped, the implications too dangerous to voice aloud. "Between mates," Kira finished quietly, her voice barely audible in the charged silence. The word hung between them like a death sentence. Because if they were truly mates, if the mate bond had chosen them for each other, then everything about his political alliance became impossible. The carefully negotiated treaty with her pack, the arranged mating with Lydia, the strategic marriage that would secure both their territories against the growing rogue threat. All of it crumbled in the face of supernatural truth. "I can't," Darius said, but his hands continued their gentle examination of her wounds, his touch continuing to accelerate her healing in ways that defied medical explanation. "The alliance with your pack is crucial for the war that's coming. My people need the security this treaty provides." Kira's wolf whined again, softer this time, pressing closer to his warmth despite the impossibility of their situation. The sound made him close his eyes in pain, his carefully maintained control fracturing under the weight of destiny he couldn't accept. "My wolf has never recognized anyone," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Not in 30 years of searching, not among the dozens of potential mates presented by allied packs. But the moment I saw you—" He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The moment your wolf whined for me, everything changed." His touch moved to the claw marks across her ribs, and again her torn flesh responded with impossible healing. Her wolf purred deep in her chest, a sound of contentment and recognition that she had never made for anyone else. Tell me about your bloodline, Darius said, his healer's focus warring with the mate bond that demanded he claim and protect her. Where did you come from? Who are your parents? I don't know, Kira admitted, the old shame burning in her chest. I was found as a child, wandering the forest with no memory of my origins. The pack took me in out of duty, but I've never belonged. My wolf has always been wrong somehow, too fierce, too defensive, too different from what they expected. Darius's hand stilled on her healing ribs, something shifting in his expression as he processed her words. Not wrong, he said quietly, hidden. The single word sent shivers down her spine, carrying implications she didn't understand, but her wolf recognized with desperate hope. What do you mean? Some bloodlines carry power that can be suppressed, sealed away to prevent recognition, he explained, his touch moving to examine the head wound that had nearly killed her. If you were found with no memory, if your wolf has always felt different. He trailed off, golden eyes blazing with possibility and terrible understanding. Under his hands, even the head trauma began to heal, the constant ache that had plagued her since the battle finally beginning to fade. Her wolf stretched luxuriously, no longer cowering in pain, but radiating contentment at his touch. The political marriage, Kira said quietly, her heart breaking even as her body healed. You have to honour the alliance, I understand. Do you? Darius moved closer, his presence overwhelming but no longer frightening. Because my wolf is going insane at the thought of claiming someone else, at the thought of letting you go back to a pack that treats you like nothing when you're clearly everything. His hand cupped her face with impossible gentleness, thumb brushing across her cheekbone as he studied her features like he was memorizing them. You're not nothing, Kira. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've made you believe about yourself, it's a lie. Her wolf whined again, pressing toward his touch with desperate affection, and he answered with a low growl of possession that vibrated through his chest. 3 days, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of political necessity and personal agony. The formal alliance ceremony is in 3 days. After that... He didn't finish, couldn't voice the reality that would separate them forever. I know, Kira whispered, her newly healed body strong enough to bear the emotional pain that no supernatural power could touch. I've always known I couldn't have what I wanted. But even as she accepted the impossibility, even as they both acknowledged the political forces that would tear them apart, neither of them moved away from the other's touch. Neither of them broke the connection that felt more real than anything else in their lives. For this stolen moment in this private chamber, away from watching eyes and political obligations, they could pretend the mate bond was enough, that love could overcome duty, that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe's choice mattered more than human politics. Outside the chamber door, footsteps approached with deliberate purpose, and they both knew their stolen time was ending. But Kira's wolf had stopped whining in pain and started whining in recognition, and that soft sound would haunt them both until destiny decided their fate. Chapter 5. The Pack's Suspicion. The whispers started before dawn. Kira heard them through the thin walls of the servants' quarters, voices carrying the kind of speculation that cut deeper than claws. Pack members who had barely acknowledged her existence now spoke her name with a mixture of confusion and growing hostility. Did you see how he looked at her? The Alpha King, at that broken thing. Something's not right about it. Kings don't notice servants unless... The conversations died when she limped past, but the stares followed her with new intensity. Where once she had been invisible, now she felt dissected by dozens of eyes that searched for whatever had captured their legendary visitor's impossible attention. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, stronger than it had been in days thanks to the Alpha King's healing touch, but the renewed strength only made her more noticeable. Her limp was less pronounced, her movements steadier, and pack members who had grown accustomed to her obvious weakness now watched her with suspicious calculation. "You!" Beta Marcus snapped, his voice cutting across the kitchen where Kira was scrubbing serving platters. "Alpha wants to see you." The command sent ice through her veins. Alpha Garrett's summons were never good news, but with the pack's whispers growing louder by the hour, she suspected this conversation would be particularly brutal. She found him in his private study, surrounded by the trophies of successful hunts and conquered enemies. His scarred face wore the expression of a man dealing with a problem that threatened his carefully constructed political arrangements. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a chair positioned to make her feel small and exposed. "We need to discuss your newfound visibility." Kira remained standing, her wolf's defensive instincts stronger now that healing had restored some of her natural strength. "I haven't done anything wrong. Haven't you?" Garrett's eyes narrowed as he studied her improved posture, the way she no longer cowered automatically in his presence. "Yesterday you could barely walk. Today you're standing straight and meeting my gaze. That kind of accelerated healing doesn't happen naturally." The implication hung between them like a loaded weapon. Accelerated healing meant supernatural intervention, and there was only one supernatural force in their territory powerful enough to work such miracles. "The Alpha King," Garrett continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "has shown you unprecedented attention. Attention that threatens the very foundation of our alliance negotiations. So I'll ask you once, what did you do to bewitch him?" "Nothing," Kira said firmly, her wolf bristling at the accusation despite the danger of showing defiance. "I served food, that's all." "Liar." The word cracked like a whip across the small room. "Kings don't interrupt pack discipline for serving girls. Kings don't personally tend to the wounds of worthless outcasts. Unless—" his expression shifted to something uglier than simple anger. "Unless that outcast used forbidden magic to cloud his judgment." The accusation hit like a physical blow. In their world, using supernatural manipulation against an alpha was a crime punishable by death, and suggesting she had bewitched the Alpha King was essentially signing her execution warrant. "I didn't—" "The evidence suggests otherwise." Garrett rose from his chair, his own wolf pressing close to the surface with threatening intent. "Your miraculous recovery, his inexplicable interest, the way our carefully negotiated alliance suddenly hangs in the balance because our guest can't stop looking at a crippled servant." Kira's wolf snarled silently, hackles raised at the continued insults, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. Showing aggression now would only confirm his suspicions about her supernatural interference. "From now on, your duties are doubled," Garrett announced, his tone suggesting the decision was already final. "You'll work the kitchens, the stables, and the laundry, dawn to midnight, every day until the Alpha King leaves our territory, and you'll stay away from the Great Hall, away from anywhere he might see you." The punishment was designed to break her, to exhaust her newly healed body until she collapsed back into the broken state they expected. But her wolf lifted its head with something that felt dangerously like defiance. "The pack is talking," Garrett continued, circling her like a predator sizing up wounded prey. "They're saying you've bewitched our royal guest. They're saying you're a threat to the alliance that keeps our territory safe from the rogues." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And if this alliance fails because of your unnatural influence, I'll personally ensure you pay the price for every pack member who dies in the resulting war." Kira left the study with her hands shaking and her wolf pacing restlessly in her chest. The threat was clear. Stay invisible or face consequences that extended far beyond her own survival. But invisibility had become impossible. Pack members tracked her movements with hostile curiosity, their whispered speculations growing bolder with each passing hour. "She's different today," she heard a warrior mutter as she hauled water to the stables. "Stronger, that's not natural healing." "Witchcraft," another responded with disgusted certainty. "Has to be. Nothing else explains the king's behaviour." By midday, the hostile stares had evolved into deliberate obstacles. Warriors who had previously ignored her now stepped into her path, forcing her to navigate around their intimidating presence. Females who had once dismissed her as beneath notice now watched her with calculating malice. "Look at her. Lydia's voice carried across the courtyard as Kira struggled with an overloaded laundry basket, trying so hard to appear innocent when everyone knows what she's done. The golden she-wolf approached with her usual entourage, but there was something sharper in her manner now, something desperate beneath the practiced cruelty. The Alpha King's attention to a servant had shaken her confidence, made her realize that political arrangements could be overturned by forces she couldn't control. "Did you really think it would work?" Lydia asked, her voice pitched to carry to the surrounding pack members. "Did you think your pathetic attempts at seduction would convince a king to abandon his duties?" Kira's wolf bared its teeth inside her chest, the defensive response stronger now that her body had healed enough to contemplate actual resistance. But she forced herself to remain silent, to endure the public humiliation without giving them excuse for further persecution. "The king leaves in 2 days," Lydia continued, her beautiful face twisted with vindictive satisfaction. "And when he does, when this alliance is properly sealed, you'll remember exactly what you are, what you've always been." Nothing. The word hung unspoken, but understood by every wolf within hearing range. But as Kira carried her burdens through the compound under the weight of hostile stares, as pack members whispered about witchcraft and unnatural influence, her wolf no longer cowered at the accusations. Her wolf remembered golden eyes that had seen something worth protecting. Her wolf remembered gentle hands that had healed instead of harmed. Her wolf remembered whining softly in recognition instead of pain. And for the first time in her life, Kira began to wonder if maybe they were wrong about what she was. Maybe they had always been wrong. Chapter 6. Moonlight Revelations. The moon hung full and silver above the sacred grove, casting shadows that danced between ancient trees like living things. Kira had waited until the compound slept before slipping away from her quarters, her wolf desperate for solitude after a day of hostile stares and whispered accusations. Her body ached from Alpha Garrett's punishing workload, but the pain was different now, manageable. Her wolf moved with renewed strength beneath her skin, the accelerated healing from the Alpha King's touch still working its impossible magic through her system. She found refuge in the grove's heart, where a circle of moonstone pillars stood sentinel around a natural spring. The sacred space had always called to her, though she'd never understood why. Tonight, with moonlight turning the stones to silver fire, the pull felt stronger than ever. Kira settled beside the spring's edge and began unwrapping the fresh bandages that covered wounds that should have taken weeks to heal. Under the moon's light, her skin showed only faint pink lines where deep gashes had been torn by enemy claws. "Impossible!" she whispered, tracing the nearly vanished scars with wondering fingers. "This shouldn't be happening." "But it is happening." The voice came from the shadows beyond the moonstone circle, deep and familiar, and sending shivers of recognition through her entire being. Alpha King. Darius stepped into the sacred space like he belonged there, moonlight catching the gold in his eyes and making them burn with supernatural fire. His presence filled the grove, made the ancient stones hum with responding energy. "You came," she breathed, her wolf whining softly in greeting, despite the danger of this clandestine meeting. "I couldn't stay away." The admission sounded torn from his throat, raw with emotion he couldn't quite control. "My wolf has been going insane since this afternoon, pulling toward you like a compass seeking magnetic north." He approached the spring with careful reverence, his own supernatural nature responding to the sacred energy that permeated the grove. When he knelt beside her in the moonlight, both their wolves stirred with recognition so profound it made the air electric. "Show me," he said quietly, his golden gaze fixed on her healing wounds. Kira's hands trembled as she revealed the nearly invisible scars, the miraculous recovery that defied every law of natural healing. Under the moon's silver light, with the Alpha King's presence amplifying everything supernatural, the evidence became undeniable. "Mate bond acceleration," Darius confirmed, his voice rough with wonder and terrible understanding. This only happens between true pairs, destined pairs." The words hung between them like a death sentence and a promise wrapped in the same breath. "But your promise to Lydia," Kira whispered, her heart breaking even as her wolf pressed closer to his overwhelming warmth. "The alliance?" "The alliance was arranged by people who couldn't know about this." His hand reached toward her face, stopping just short of contact as he fought the pull between duty and destiny. They couldn't know that somewhere in their territory was the one wolf in all the world meant to be mine. When his fingers finally brushed her cheek, golden light erupted between them. Not metaphorical warmth, but actual luminescence that painted the moonstone circle in supernatural fire and made both their wolves emerge partially with gasps of recognition. "What are we?" Kira breathed, staring at the golden threads of light that seemed to weave between their bodies like visible proof of connection. Fated mates," Darius said simply, his voice carrying the weight of ancient truth. "The rarest of supernatural bonds, one pair in 1,000 generations, if that." His wolf pressed closer to the surface, golden eyes blazing as it recognized its other half in the silver light that began to emanate from Kira's skin. Her own wolf responded with a harmony so perfect it made her bones ache with rightness. "There are legends," Darius continued, his hand moving to trace the pulse at her throat where her wolf's power beat strongest. "About bloodlines that were hidden because their power was too great to be controlled. About royal lines that went into exile rather than submit to those who feared what they represented." "Royal lines?" The words escaped as barely a whisper. "You were found with no memory, but look at you now." His touch followed the silver light that seemed to flow beneath her skin like liquid moonbeams. Under the full moon, with a mate bond awakening your suppressed heritage, your true nature is starting to break free. The spring beside them began to glow, responding to whatever power was building between them. Ancient magic, older than pack politics and territorial alliances, recognizing something that had been lost for generations. "I don't understand," Kira said, but even as she spoke, memories that weren't quite memories flickered at the edge of her consciousness. Silver wolves running through moonlit forests, a crown that caught starlight, a voice calling her name that wasn't the name she'd grown up with. "Your wolf has always been different because she's not just any wolf," Darius explained, his own power rising to match hers in golden waves. "She's been sleeping, suppressed, waiting for something powerful enough to wake her properly." "You," Kira breathed, understanding flooding through her as their combined power turned the grove into something from legend. "Us," he corrected, leaning closer until their foreheads almost touched. "This bond, this recognition, it's not just attraction, Kira. It's the universe correcting something that was hidden long ago." The golden and silver light swirled between them like a living thing, and for one perfect moment the political complications disappeared. There was only truth, only recognition, only the certainty that whatever they were together was more real than any human arrangement. But dawn was approaching, painting the eastern sky with the first hints of colour, and they both knew their stolen time was ending. "2 more days," Darius said, his voice carrying all the pain of impossible choices. "After the ceremony." "I know," Kira whispered, her heart breaking as the light began to fade and reality crept back into their sacred space. But as they separated, as he disappeared back into the shadows and she returned to the compound, her wolf no longer whined in pain or confusion. Her wolf whined in recognition of truth finally acknowledged, of power finally stirring, of a destiny that neither pack politics nor royal obligations could permanently deny. Chapter 7. The Oracle's Warning. The ancient oracle arrived with the dawn, her presence announced by the sudden stillness that fell over every creature in the compound. Birds stopped singing, insects ceased their buzzing, and even the wind held its breath as the legendary seer stepped through the gates. Kira felt the arrival like a blow to her chest, her wolf suddenly rigid with an awareness that bordered on terror. She had been scrubbing the courtyard stones when the silence descended, and now she found herself frozen in place, her hands clutching the washing brush like a lifeline. Oracle Thana was older than memory, her silver hair braided with bones and sacred stones that caught the morning light like captured stars. Her milky eyes saw nothing and everything, and when her gaze swept across the assembled pack, wolves dropped to their knees in instinctive reverence. "I have come to bless the Alliance," the oracle announced, her voice carrying the weight of centuries and the authority of one who spoke for the ancient powers. "To witness the union that will secure both territories against the darkness that gathers." Alpha Garrett stepped forward with careful respect, but before he could speak, something impossible happened. The oracle's wolf, legendary for its indifference to mortal hierarchies, suddenly turned its attention toward the servants' area, where Kira knelt among the washing. The ancient creature's recognition was unmistakable, its supernatural senses locking onto something that made every pack member follow its gaze with growing confusion. "You," Oracle Thana said, her milky eyes finding Kira across the crowded courtyard with unnerving precision. "Come forward, child!" The command sent ice through Kira's veins. Being singled out by the oracle was either the greatest honour or the most terrible curse, and given her recent notoriety, she suspected it was the latter. She approached on trembling legs, aware of every hostile stare that followed her progress. The Alpha King stood among the honoured guests, his golden eyes blazing with concern he couldn't openly express. Oracle Thana studied her with those unseeing eyes that missed nothing, her ancient wolf stirring with recognition that made the assembled pack murmur in confusion. "Give me your hands," the oracle commanded. Kira extended her trembling fingers, and the moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into visions that stole her breath and sent her to her knees. Silver wolves running through moonlit forests, a crown of starlight and shadow, ancient bloodlines that had ruled before the current pack structures existed, and through it all, a voice calling a name that wasn't Kira, a name that tasted of power and destiny and terrible responsibility. "Luna," the oracle whispered, the name falling like a stone into still water. Princess of the Silver Crown bloodline, last heir to the Moon Throne. The revelation rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Pack members who had dismissed Kira as worthless now stared at her with shock and growing fear. The serving girl they had tormented might be royalty lost to legend. "Impossible," Alpha Garrett breathed, his face white with the implications. "The bloodline was thought extinct," Oracle Thana continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtyard. "But power like this cannot be truly destroyed, only hidden, suppressed, sealed away by those who feared what it represented." Her ancient hands gripped Kira's wrists with surprising strength, and more visions flooded through the connection. A child running through burning halls, magic meant to erase memory and suppress power, a conspiracy spanning decades to keep the Silver Crown bloodline from awakening. "Your injuries were never from weakness," the oracle said, her voice gentle despite the earth-shaking revelations. "They were from power, trying to break free from barriers placed in childhood. Your wolf has been fighting those restraints your entire life." Kira's wolf stirred inside her chest, responding to the oracle's words with recognition so profound it made her bones ache. This was why she had always felt different, why her wolf had never fit the pack's expectations, why she had always seemed broken when she was actually just suppressed. "The hidden princess," Oracle Thana announced to the assembled crowd, "whose wolf will either save or destroy 2 kingdoms, depending on the choices made in the next day." The cryptic warning sent murmurs of fear through the pack. Prophecies from the oracle were never simple, never clear, and always carried consequences that extended far beyond their immediate meaning. But Lydia had moved closer during the revelation, her beautiful face twisted with calculation and growing desperation. If Kira was truly royal, if she carried blood that rivaled any political alliance, then everything Lydia had worked for was threatened. "Royal blood doesn't matter if she's dead," Lydia whispered, her words meant only for her closest allies, but carrying to Kira's supernaturally enhanced hearing. The oracle's milky eyes snapped toward the golden she-wolf with sudden focus. "Beware, child of ambition. The universe has plans that do not bend to mortal scheming. What is meant to be, will be, regardless of your interference." But Lydia's expression had hardened into something ugly and determined. If prophecy threatened her position, then prophecy would have to be challenged. Oracle Thana turned back to Kira, her ancient hands still gripping the revealed princess with ceremonial significance. "Your awakening comes through great pain and loss, child, but remember this. Your wolf bares its teeth at those who would harm the innocent, and whines softly only for those who recognize your true worth." The words echoed the very title that had drawn the Alpha King to this territory, the behavior that had started everything. Kira's wolf responded to the prophecy with a recognition that felt like destiny clicking into place. "Otrel, one day remains," the oracle warned, releasing Kira's hands and stepping back with the gravity of one who had delivered fate's message. "Choose wisely who you trust, Princess Luna. Not everyone who claims to serve your best interests actually does." As the ancient seer moved away to begin the formal blessing ceremonies, Kira remained kneeling in the courtyard, her mind reeling from revelations that changed everything she had ever believed about herself. She was not broken. She was not worthless. She was not a burden the pack had reluctantly accepted. She was Luna, princess of the Silver Crown bloodline, and her wolf had been trying to tell her the truth her entire life. But as she rose on shaking legs, she caught the murderous calculation in Lydia's eyes and realized that royal blood made her a target as well as a revelation. Some people would kill to prevent the prophecy from fulfilling itself, and tomorrow's ceremony might become a battlefield where more than just alliances were decided. Chapter 8. The Assassination Attempt. The attack came at midnight when the compound slept and the Alpha King was away finalizing treaty negotiations with neighboring territories. Kira woke to the sound of her door splintering, her wolf exploding into alertness as armed figures flooded into her small chamber. "Now!" Lydia's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Before she can shift, before she can scream for help!" Kira rolled from her narrow bed as the first warrior lunged, his silver blade aimed for her heart. Her injured leg nearly buckled, but her wolf's desperate surge of adrenaline kept her upright as she dodged the killing blow by mere inches. "You should have stayed invisible!" Warrior Kane snarled, his face twisted with the kind of hatred reserved for threats to the natural order. "Should have accepted what you were instead of reaching for what you could never have." 4 warriors surrounded her in the cramped space, their coordinated movements speaking of careful planning. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was assassination designed to look like an accident, the removal of an inconvenient obstacle to political necessity. "The oracle was wrong," Lydia said from the doorway, her golden beauty made monstrous by moonlight and murderous intent. "There is no Princess Luna. There's only a delusional serving girl who forgot her place and will die for her presumption." Kira's wolf bared its teeth in desperate defiance, but she could feel the hopelessness of her situation. Her body was still healing, still weaker than it should be, and even with the accelerated recovery from the mate bond, she couldn't match 4 trained warriors in their prime. The second blade came from her left, slicing across her ribs and sending hot blood streaming down her side. The pain was sharp and immediate, but something else happened in that moment of violence. Something that had been sleeping since childhood began to stir. "Hold her down," Kane commanded, grabbing for her arms as another warrior moved to pin her legs. Make it look like she fell, like her injuries reopened and she bled out in her sleep. But as their hands closed on her wounded flesh, as they dragged her toward what was meant to be her death. The barriers that had contained her power for 18 years finally began to crack. Power flooded through her veins like liquid silver fire. Her wolf, no longer the grey and broken creature they expected, began to emerge with a luminescence that turned the small chamber bright as daylight. "What the hell?" Kane's words died as Kira's partially shifted form threw him across the room with strength that defied every law of physics they understood. Her wolf was growing, expanding, silver fur erupting along her arms and face as ancient power finally broke free from its magical prison. The pain was excruciating, years of suppression being violently released all at once, but beneath the agony was something else. Rage, pure righteous fury at the pack that had tormented her, dismissed her, tried to murder her for the crime of existing beyond their narrow expectations. The third warrior tried to flee, but Kira's partially shifted form moved with predatory grace that belonged to something far more dangerous than any ordinary wolf. Her claws, now silver and gleaming with supernatural light, opened his throat before he reached the door. "She's shifting!" Lydia screamed from the hallway, her voice cracking with terror as she witnessed the impossible transformation. "She's not supposed to be able to shift like that!" But Kira was beyond caring what she was supposed to be able to do. Her wolf had spent 18 years caged behind magical barriers, and now that freedom was within reach, nothing would stop its emergence. The fourth warrior raised his blade in a final desperate attack, but Kira caught his wrist with strength that crushed bone. Silver light blazed from her eyes as she looked at the man who had come to murder her in her sleep. "You wanted to see what I really am," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of ancient power and royal authority. "Here I am." The transformation completed itself in a rush of silver fire and crackling energy. Where the broken serving girl had knelt moments before, now stood something from legend. A wolf the size of a small horse, her fur gleaming like moonlight on water, her eyes burning with the power of royal bloodlines thought extinct. Princess Luna, heir to the silver crown, had finally awakened. The remaining warriors threw down their weapons and fled, their courage evaporating in the face of power they had never imagined possible. But Lydia remained in the doorway, her beautiful face twisted with hate and desperate calculation. "This changes nothing," she snarled, though her voice shook with barely controlled terror. "The alliance must proceed. The king will choose duty over some pretender's claims to royal blood." Kira's massive wolf form turned toward the golden she-wolf with predatory focus. Her voice, when it came, carried the authority of centuries of royal bloodline and the fury of someone who had endured a lifetime of cruelty. "We'll see about that." But before she could act on the threat, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the compound. Heavy boots moving with deadly purpose, accompanied by the kind of overwhelming presence that made even walls seem to tremble in anticipation. Alpha King Darius had returned early from his negotiations, drawn by bonds of mate connection that had screamed through his consciousness the moment his Luna faced mortal danger. And when he stepped into the doorway behind Lydia, when he saw his fated mate standing in her full royal glory, surrounded by the evidence of assassination attempts, his golden eyes blazed with a fury that made even Kira's awakened power seem tame by comparison. "Explain," he commanded, his voice carrying death in its depths as he surveyed the carnage. "Explain why there are dead wolves in my mate's chamber. Explain why I can smell your involvement in this attack, Lydia. Explain before I decide that political alliances mean less than the safety of the woman the universe chose for me." The Alpha King had returned to find his princess finally awakened, finally claiming her true power, and anyone who had threatened her was about to discover exactly what happened when someone tried to murder the mate of the most powerful alpha alive. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. The great hall had been hastily transformed into a tribunal, pack members gathering in tense silence as Alpha King Darius demanded answers that could reshape the political landscape of two territories. Oracle Thana sat in the place of highest honour, her ancient authority the only force present that could command even a king's respect. Kira stood before them all in her human form, but the silver light still flickered beneath her skin like barely contained lightning. Her awakening had changed everything about her presence. Where once she had seemed broken and invisible, now she radiated the kind of power that made lesser wolves drop their gazes in instinctive submission. Princess Luna, heir to the Silver Crown bloodline, was no longer hiding. "Tell them," Darius commanded, his golden eyes blazing with fury that had been building since he'd found assassination attempts in his mate's chambers. "Tell them what you told me, Oracle. Tell them the truth about what was done to her." Oracle Thana rose with the careful dignity of one who carried centuries of accumulated wisdom. Her milky eyes swept the assembled pack with judgment that found them all wanting. 18 years ago, a child was brought to this pack by those who served darker masters, she began, her voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. A child whose memory had been deliberately destroyed, whose power had been magically suppressed, whose very identity had been stolen to prevent a prophecy from fulfilling itself. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but the oracle's raised hand demanded silence. The Silver Crown bloodline was not destroyed in the wars, as history claims. The last princess was hidden, her royal wolf sealed behind barriers meant to last a lifetime. But power like this cannot be permanently contained, only delayed in its awakening. Alpha Garrett sat rigid in his chair, his face pale with implications he was only beginning to understand. The child we took in. She was given to us by travelling merchants who claimed her parents had died of plague. Lies, the oracle said simply. She was placed here deliberately by those who served the Crimson Fang Alliance, enemies of both your pack and the Alpha King's territory, who feared what would happen if the royal bloodlines ever united. The revelation hit the hall like a physical force. The Crimson Fang Alliance, rogues and exiled wolves who had been orchestrating attacks on border territories, weakening pack structures to make conquest easier. The assassination attempts, the mysterious border raids, the convenient timing of alliance negotiations, Darius said, his voice carrying deadly understanding. It was all orchestrated to prevent Luna from awakening, and when that failed, to keep us from recognizing what she was. Kira felt the truth settling over her like a mantle of terrible responsibility. Everything she had suffered, every moment of cruelty and dismissal, had been part of a larger conspiracy to prevent her from claiming her birthright. The false alliance, Oracle Thana continued, her gaze finding Lydia among the crowd, was designed to bind the Alpha King to a political marriage that would prevent the prophesied union. A union that would create the most powerful mated pair in 1,000 years. Lydia stood defiant, despite being surrounded by evidence of her treachery. "The alliance serves the greater good," she snarled. "One delusional girl's fantasies about royal blood don't outweigh the security of two territories." "Don't they?" Darius stepped forward, his presence filling the hall with the kind of authority that made kingdoms tremble. "Because the mate bond between myself and Princess Luna isn't fantasy, it's destiny. And anyone who tried to prevent that destiny through murder and conspiracy will face the consequences." The silver light beneath Kira's skin pulsed stronger, responding to his proximity and his public claiming of their bond. Her wolf, no longer suppressed and broken, lifted its head with royal pride as the truth finally came to light. "The prophecy speaks of a union that will either save or destroy kingdoms," the oracle said, her ancient voice carrying the weight of fate itself. The Silver Crown Princess and the Golden Wolf King, their combined power either bringing peace through strength or war through the enemies who fear their united rule. "And Lydia?" Darius's voice dropped to something that promised violence. What was her role in this conspiracy? The golden she-wolf's composure finally cracked. desperation making her voice sharp with panic. "I did what was necessary. The Crimson Fang promised that if the false alliance succeeded, if you were bound to me instead of her, they would retreat from both our territories. Peace through compromise." "Peace through betrayal," Kira said, her voice carrying harmonics of royal authority that made even hardened warriors step back. Peace built on lies and the attempted murder of inconvenient truths. The power awakening in her was intoxicating, years of suppressed strength finally flowing through her veins like liquid fire. But with the power came understanding of who she had been, of what had been stolen from her, of the conspiracy that had shaped her entire life. "The barriers were designed to break eventually," Oracle Thana explained, her gaze finding Kira with something like maternal pride. "Ancient magic cannot permanently suppress royal bloodlines. The signs were always there. Her wolf's unusual behavior, her resistance to pack hierarchy, the way she instinctively protected others despite having no power to do so herself." "Her teeth baring at those who would harm the innocent," Darius added quietly, remembering the very behavior that had first caught his attention. "And whining softly only for those who recognized her worth." The words from the prophecy, from the title that had brought them together, suddenly made perfect sense. Her wolf had been trying to tell everyone what she truly was, but only the Alpha King had been powerful enough to hear the message beneath the surface. "The Crimson Fang Alliance will not accept this awakening quietly," the Oracle warned, her voice carrying the gravity of approaching storm clouds. "They will move against you both, against the union they fear above all else. The next hours will determine whether the prophecy brings salvation or destruction." Kira felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a crown made of starlight and responsibility. She was no longer the broken outcast who had spent her life being dismissed as worthless. She was Princess Luna, heir to ancient power and royal authority. She was the Alpha King's fated mate, their bond prophesied to reshape the balance of power across all territories, and she was the target of enemies who would kill anything rather than see that prophecy fulfilled. But as she stood in the great hall surrounded by the pack that had tormented her, with the truth finally blazing like silver fire for all to see, one thing had become absolutely clear. She was done hiding, done cowering, done pretending to be less than what she was. The Silver Crown Princess had awakened, and the world would never be the same.